There is a question that haunts every adopted child, and it is a question that no amount of love, no amount of stability, no amount of birthday parties and bedtime stories can ever fully answer. The question is simple. Why did she give me up? For 25 years, a young woman named Jasmine Carter lived with that question. It sat at the dinner table with her. It followed her to school. It whispered to her at night when everyone else was asleep. And then one afternoon on the Family Feud stage, she looked into the eyes of a woman she had never met and got her answer. But it was not the answer she expected. And the truth behind why her mother gave her away was so devastating, so heartbreaking, and so full of a love that most people will never understand, that Steve Harvey, the man who has seen everything, could not hold back his tears. He did not even try. If you believe that love can survive anything, even 25 years of silence, then you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell right now. This story is going to wreck you in the best possible way. Jasmine Carter was 25 years old. She was a kindergarten teacher in Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of teacher who got down on the floor with her students and read them stories with different voices for every character. She had big brown eyes, a quick laugh, and a warmth about her that made every child in her classroom feel safe. The parents loved her. The principal called her a natural. And if you watched her with those 5-year-olds, the way she held their hands when they were scared and wiped their faces when they cried and told them they were brave even when they did not feel brave, you would think she had learned that tenderness from someone who had raised her the exact same way. And she had. Jasmine was raised by Frank and Diane Carter, a couple from Charlotte who had adopted her when she was 6 days old. They were wonderful parents. Frank was an accountant who coached soccer on the weekends. Diane was a nurse who made the best macaroni and cheese in Mecklenburg County and who never let Jasmine go to sleep without hearing the words, "I love you and I chose you." That second part was important. Diane always said it. "I chose you." Because she wanted Jasmine to know that being adopted did not mean being unwanted. It meant being selected, picked, chosen on purpose. Jasmine had a good childhood, a great childhood, honestly. She never lacked for anything. She had a bedroom with butterfly wallpaper. She had a dog named Biscuit. She went to summer camp and dance recitals and family vacations to Myrtle Beach. Frank and Diane gave her everything two loving parents could give, and Jasmine loved them with her whole heart. But the question was always there. It lived in the gap between what she had and what she did not know. Who was her birth mother? Why had she given Jasmine up? Was she alive? Did she ever think about the baby she left behind? The Carters were honest with Jasmine from the beginning. They told her she was adopted when she was old enough to understand the word. They told her that her birth mother was a young woman who had made a very difficult decision because she loved Jasmine too much to keep her. But they did not know much beyond that. The adoption had been arranged through a private agency that had since closed. The birth mother's file was sealed. The Carters had tried to obtain more information when Jasmine was a teenager, but every door was locked. Jasmine's need to know intensified as she got older. In college, she started searching on her own. She joined adoption reunion registries. She submitted her DNA to every genetic testing service she could find. She spent hours on message boards and Facebook groups dedicated to connecting birth parents with adoptees. She searched with the intensity of someone who needed an answer the way a drowning person needs air. Not because she was unhappy, not because the Carters were not enough, but because there was a piece of her story missing, and without it, she could not feel complete. When Jasmine was 23, she got her first lead. A DNA match through one of the testing services connected her with a second cousin in Raleigh, North Carolina. Through that cousin, Jasmine traced her biological family tree back through 3 generations, and at the end of that tree she found a name. Ruth Ann Mitchell, born in 1974 in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Jasmine's birth mother. But finding the name was just the beginning. Finding Ruth Ann herself was another matter entirely. Ruth Ann Mitchell's story was the other half of this equation, and it was the half that nobody saw coming. Ruth Ann was born in Fayetteville to a strict military family. Her father, Sergeant William Mitchell, was stationed at Fort Bragg. Her mother, Evelyn, was a homemaker who ran the household like a barracks. There was not a lot of softness in the Mitchell home. There were rules. There were expectations. And there was absolutely no room for the kind of trouble that Ruth Ann found herself in at the age of 15. Ruth Ann got pregnant. The father was a boy from her high school, a kid named Terrence who disappeared from her life the moment he found out. That was 1999. And in the Mitchell household, an unmarried pregnant teenager was not a situation to be supported. It was a situation to be handled. Sergeant Mitchell made the decision. The baby would be placed for adoption. There would be no discussion. Ruth Ann would not hold the baby. She would not name the baby. She would not see the baby. She would go to her aunt's house in Greensboro for the last 4 months of the pregnancy. She would deliver at a hospital there, and the baby would be placed with a family through a private agency. Then Ruth Ann would come home, and the family would move on as if nothing had happened. Ruth Ann begged. She got on her knees in the kitchen of her parents' house and begged her father to let her keep her baby. She was 15 years old, crying on a linoleum floor, promising that she would be a good mother, that she would finish school, that she would not be a burden. Sergeant Mitchell looked at her and said, "This is not a discussion. This is what is happening." Evelyn, Ruth Ann's mother, stood in the doorway and watched. She did not intervene. She did not speak up. She did not hold her daughter. Ruth Ann never forgave her mother for that silence, not because Evelyn was a bad person, but because sometimes the worst betrayal is not what someone does to you. It is what they do not do when you need them most. Ruth Ann was sent to Greensboro. She gave birth on a Tuesday morning in March 1999. She held the baby for 4 minutes. 4 minutes. The nurse let her, even though the paperwork said no contact. In those 4 minutes, Ruth Ann memorized her daughter's face, the shape of her nose, the curl of her tiny fingers, the way she opened her mouth like a little bird. Ruth Ann whispered 3 things to her baby. She said, "I love you, I am sorry, and I will find you." Then the nurse took the baby and Ruth Ann's arms were empty. What happened to Ruth Ann after the adoption was a slow-motion catastrophe. She went back to Fayetteville. She finished high school. She enrolled in community college, but the grief of losing her daughter ate through everything like acid. She could not concentrate. She could not sleep. She developed severe depression and anxiety that went untreated because the Mitchell family did not believe in therapy. Sergeant Mitchell told her to pray about it. Evelyn told her to keep busy. Ruth Ann dropped out of college after 1 semester. She moved out of her parents' house at 19 and drifted from job to job across North Carolina. Waitressing, cleaning hotel rooms, stocking shelves at a warehouse. She was not lazy. She was drowning, and nobody threw her a rope. She married a man named Curtis when she was 22. Curtis was not a good man. He was controlling and cruel, and he drank too much. Ruth Ann stayed with him for 5 years because she did not believe she deserved better. When you give away your child at 15 and nobody in your family acknowledges the wound, you start to believe that you are the kind of person to whom bad things are supposed to happen. Curtis was just another bad thing. She left Curtis when she was 27 and moved to Fayetteville, where she got a job at a daycare center. Working with children was both the best and the worst thing for Ruth Ann. Best because she was extraordinary with kids. She had a patience and a gentleness that came from somewhere deep and instinctive, the same qualities Jasmine would later show in her own classroom, though neither of them knew the other existed yet. Worst because every child Ruth Ann cared for reminded her of the daughter she had held for 4 minutes and never seen again. Ruth Ann searched for Jasmine, not with the same tools Jasmine would later have. Ruth Ann did not have DNA databases or social media algorithms. She had phone calls to an agency that no longer existed. She had letters to the county courthouse that were returned unopened. She had a name she had given the baby in her head but never on paper because the paperwork said no contact. The system that had taken her daughter had also taken every path back to her. By the time Ruth Ann was 40, she had rebuilt her life. She had gotten her GED. She had completed a certification program and was now the assistant director of the daycare center. She had a small apartment that was clean and warm and filled with books. She went to church on Sundays. She had a group of women friends who looked out for each other. She had even started dating a decent man named Thomas who treated her with the respect she had never gotten from Curtis or from her own father. But every year on the Tuesday in March when her daughter was born, Ruth Ann would light a candle and sit alone in her apartment and talk to a baby she had not seen in over 2 decades. She would say the same 3 things she had whispered in the hospital. "I love you, I am sorry, and I will She never missed a year, not once, for 25 years. Jasmine found Ruth Ann's name, but finding the person attached to that name took another 18 months. Ruth Ann had moved multiple times. She had changed jobs. She had no social media presence. She was, in many ways, a woman who had spent her adult life trying to be invisible because visibility meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant pain. It was Jasmine's adoptive mother, Diane, who finally broke through. Diane was a nurse, and nurses know how to navigate systems. She made phone calls. She contacted the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. She found a social worker who specialized in adoption reunions. And that social worker, a woman named Linda Patterson, tracked down Ruth Ann Mitchell in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Linda called Ruth Ann on a Wednesday evening. Ruth Ann answered the phone, and Linda said, "Ms. Mitchell, my name is Linda Patterson. I am a social worker. I am calling because your biological daughter is looking for you." Ruth Ann dropped the phone. She literally dropped it. Thomas, who was sitting on the couch, picked it up and finished the conversation while Ruth Ann sat on the kitchen floor shaking so hard she could not stand. But here is where Jasmine's family did something extraordinary. They did not just arrange a phone call or a meeting at a coffee shop. Jasmine's husband, Kevin, who had watched his wife search for her birth mother for years, contacted Family Feud. He told them the story. He told them about the 25 years. He told them about the 4 minutes in the hospital. He told them about the candle Ruth Ann lit every year. And the producers said yes. Kevin put together the family team: Jasmine, himself, Diane, Frank, and Jasmine's younger sister Rachel, who had also been adopted by the Carters. He told Jasmine they were going on the show as a fun family experience. Jasmine suspected nothing. Ruth Ann was contacted separately by the producers. She was told that her daughter would be on Family Feud and that they wanted to arrange the reunion on air. Ruth Ann said, "I have waited 25 years. I can wait one more week." Then she hung up the phone, went into her bedroom, and cried for the rest of the night. She arrived at the studio the morning of the taping. She had been in the green room since 7 in the morning. She wore a yellow dress because yellow had been the color of the blanket they had wrapped her baby in at the hospital. She had kept that detail in her memory for 25 years. And around her neck she wore a small gold locket. Inside the locket was a hospital bracelet, tiny, faded, the bracelet that had been on her daughter's wrist for the 4 minutes she held her. The nurse had looked the other way when Ruth Ann slipped it off. It was the only physical proof Ruth Ann had that her daughter existed. She had worn it around her neck every single day for a quarter century. The Carter family stood on the Family Feud stage radiating warmth. They were a good-looking family, the kind that made you smile just by being in the room. Jasmine stood at the front in a deep blue dress, her hair pulled back, her smile bright and natural. Kevin stood beside her, tall and steady. Behind them were Frank and Diane, holding hands the way they always did, and Rachel, Jasmine's younger sister, who was bouncing with excitement. They were facing the Whitfield family from Raleigh, a group of brothers who were tall, loud, and extremely competitive. The Whitfields had clearly come to win. They were high-fiving before the game even started. Steve Harvey came out and greeted both families. When he got to Jasmine, he took her hand and said, "Tell me about your family." Jasmine beamed. "Mr. Harvey, this is my husband Kevin, my mom Diane, my dad Frank, and my sister Rachel. We are the Carter family from Charlotte, and we are so excited to be here." "And what do you do, Jasmine?" "I am a kindergarten teacher." Steve smiled wide. "A kindergarten teacher? That takes a special kind of patience. I could never do that. 5-year-olds scare me." The audience laughed. Jasmine laughed. And for a moment everything was light and easy and exactly what a game show was supposed to be. The game was close. The Carter family was not the fastest, but they were the smartest. Jasmine and Diane had an almost psychic connection when it came to guessing the survey answers. They would look at each other, nod slightly, and give the same answer at the same time. Steve noticed it. "You two have some kind of mind reading going on," Steve said during a break. Diane put her arm around Jasmine. "That is what happens when you raise someone from 6 days old. You start thinking the same thoughts." Steve paused on that. 6 days old? Jasmine, you were adopted." "Yes, sir, best thing that ever happened to me." Jasmine looked at Diane and Frank. "These two are my parents, they chose me." Diane squeezed Jasmine's shoulder. Every single day. It was a warm moment, but Steve sensed something underneath it. He had been briefed. He knew there was a deeper layer to this family, so he pushed gently. "Jasmine, have you ever looked for your birth mother?" The studio got quiet. Jasmine's smile dimmed just a fraction, not from sadness exactly, from the weight of the question. "I have been looking for a long time, Mr. Harvey, since I was a teenager. I found her name about 2 years ago, Ruth Ann Mitchell, but I have not been able to find her. I do not know where she is. I do not know if she wants to be found." She paused. "I do not even know if she is alive." Kevin put his arm around Jasmine. Diane's eyes were glistening. Frank looked at the floor. Rachel reached out and held Jasmine's hand. "What would you say to her if you could?" Steve asked. Jasmine thought about it. When she spoke, her voice was steady but thin, like a thread holding up something very heavy. "I would say thank you. I know that sounds strange, but whatever reason she had for giving me up, it led me to the 2 best parents in the world, and I would tell her that I turned out okay. I think she would want to know that." Steve nodded slowly. He looked like a man who was holding a very large secret and finding it harder to hold with every passing minute. The Carter family won the game in the final round. It was Diane who got the winning steal, and the family exploded with celebration. Kevin lifted Jasmine off her feet. Frank pumped his fist. Rachel screamed. Diane just smiled, that calm nurse's smile, and said, "I knew that one." They were going to fast money. And as the stage was reset, a backstage camera caught Kevin in a hallway, speaking quietly into his phone. "Is she ready?" he whispered. A pause. "Okay, tell her it is going to be about 20 minutes. Tell her Jasmine looks beautiful. Tell her she has her smile." Another pause. Kevin's eyes got wet. Yeah, I know, just tell her we are almost there. He hung up and pressed his forehead against the wall for a moment. Then he straightened his tie, wiped his eyes, and walked back to the stage like nothing had happened. Kevin went first for fast money and scored 131 points. Solid. That meant Jasmine needed 69 points to win $20,000. She could do it. Everyone who had watched her play knew she could do it. Jasmine stepped up to the podium. Steve looked at her. Jasmine, you need 69 points. You ready? Jasmine touched the small necklace she was wearing. It was a silver chain with a tiny butterfly pendant. Diane had given it to her on her first day of kindergarten, not as a student, but as a teacher. Diane had said, butterflies start in the dark, then they fly. I am ready, Mr. Harvey. 20 seconds on the clock. Here we go. Name something a mother always remembers. Her child's birthday. Name the hardest decision a person can make. Letting go of someone you love. Name something you inherit from your parents. Name a reason someone might cry happy tears. Coming home. Name something you have been waiting your whole life to hear. Jasmine paused, her eyes filled. She pressed her fingers to her lips. And then she said in a voice so quiet the audience held its breath to hear it, I love you from the person who gave you life. The buzzer sounded. The studio was silent, not the uncomfortable silence of people who do not know what to say. The sacred silence of people who have just heard the truth spoken out loud by someone who has been carrying it for 25 years. Steve began the reveal. You said her child's birthday for something a mother always remembers. Number 1 answer, 44 points. Jasmine's hands came together in front of her chest. Letting go of someone you love for the hardest decision. Number 1 answer, 36 points. Combined with Kevin's 131, they were already at 211. They had won. Their strength for something you inherit from your parents. Number 2 answer, 21 points. Steve nodded. That is a beautiful answer, Jasmine. Coming home for a reason someone might cry happy tears. Number 1 answer, 38 points. And for something you have been waiting your whole life to hear. Steve stopped. He set his cue cards down. He put both hands on his podium and looked at Jasmine. I love you from the person who gave you life. His voice broke on the last word. He cleared his throat. Number 1 answer, 47 points. Jasmine had scored 186 points. Combined total, 317. 5 questions, 4 number 1 answers. An extraordinary performance from a woman who had answered every question from the deepest part of her heart. But Jasmine was not celebrating. She was standing at the podium with tears streaming down her face, both hands pressed against her chest like she was trying to hold something inside from breaking free. Diane ran to her. Frank ran to her. Kevin wrapped his arms around all of them. Rachel pressed her face into Jasmine's back. I want to find her, Mama, Jasmine said to Diane through her tears. I need to find her. Diane held Jasmine's face in both hands, and then Diane said something that stunned the audience. Because it was not the response anyone expected from an adoptive mother. Baby girl, you are about to... Jasmine froze. What? Diane was crying now, crying and smiling and holding her daughter's face with a love so fierce it was almost blinding. I said you are about to find her. Kevin, Frank, and I have been working on something, and Mr. Harvey has been helping us. Jasmine turned to Kevin. He was sobbing. She turned to Frank. His eyes were red. She turned to Steve Harvey, who was standing at his podium with tears running down his face, making absolutely no effort to wipe them away. What is happening? Jasmine whispered. Steve walked over to Jasmine. He moved slowly. His voice was raw. Jasmine, you told me that you have been looking for your birth mother since you were a teenager. You told me that you found her name but could not find her. You told me you do not even know if she is alive. Jasmine nodded, shaking. Jasmine, your birth mother's name is Ruth Ann Mitchell. She is 50 years old. She lives in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She works at a daycare center. Steve paused. His voice dropped lower. And Jasmine, for the past 25 years, every single year on your birthday, she has lit a candle and talked to you. She has never missed a year. Jasmine made a sound that was part gasp, part sob, part something that has no name. Her knees started to buckle. Kevin held her up. She was 15 years old when she had you, Jasmine. Her father forced her to give you up. She held you for 4 minutes in the hospital, 4 minutes. And in those 4 minutes, she whispered 3 things to you. She said, I love you, I am sorry, and I will find you. Jasmine was sobbing so hard she could barely stand. Diane was holding one arm. Kevin was holding the other. The entire audience was destroyed. Jasmine, your birth mother has been wearing something around her neck for 25 years. It is a locket, and inside that locket is your hospital bracelet, the one that was on your wrist for the 4 minutes she held you. She took it because it was the only proof she had that you were real. Steve's face crumbled. He pressed his hand over his eyes for a moment, and his shoulders shook. When he pulled his hand away, his face was a mess of tears. Steve Harvey, the man who had hosted thousands of episodes of television, who had cracked 1 million jokes and kept his composure through every emotional moment the show had ever thrown at him, could not hold it together. He was crying openly, publicly, and completely, and it was the most human moment of his entire career. "Jasmine," Steve said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother is here. She has been backstage all day. She has been watching you on a monitor. And she has been waiting 25 years for this moment. Turn around, sweetheart. Turn around and meet your mama." Jasmine turned. There at the back of the stage stood a woman in a yellow dress. She was small, 5'4". She had Jasmine's eyes, the exact same eyes, deep brown, slightly upturned at the corners, the kind of eyes that held warmth even when they were full of tears. And they were full of tears. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and they were trembling so violently that you could see it from across the stage. Around her neck was a gold locket that caught the studio lights the same way Jasmine's butterfly necklace did. Ruth Ann Mitchell, 50 years old, the 15-year-old girl who had been forced to give up her baby on a linoleum kitchen floor in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The woman who had lit a candle every year for a quarter of a century. The mother who had held her daughter for 4 minutes and spent the next 25 years trying to get her back. She was here, she was real, and she was looking at her daughter for the first time since 1999. Jasmine saw her and stopped breathing. You could actually see the moment her lungs stopped working. Her body went completely rigid. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes locked onto Ruth Ann's face, and something ancient and instinctive flickered through them. The kind of recognition that exists beneath memory, beneath consciousness, in the place where a baby knows its mother before it knows anything else. "Mama," Jasmine whispered. That one word shattered Ruth Ann. She had imagined this moment 10,000 times. She had rehearsed what she would say. She had practiced being calm and composed and worthy of the daughter she had lost. But the second she heard Jasmine's voice say that word, every wall she had spent 25 years building came down at once. Ruth Ann took a step forward, then another. Then she was walking fast, almost running, her yellow dress swaying, her locket bouncing against her chest, and her arms opening wide in a gesture so natural and so maternal that it looked like muscle memory from a time when those arms had held a newborn baby for 4 minutes and never wanted to let go. Jasmine ran. She broke free from Kevin and Diane, and she ran across that stage with her heels clicking on the floor and her tears flying behind her like rain. She ran the way a child runs toward safety. The way a grown woman runs toward an answer she has been chasing for her entire life. They met near the center of the stage, and when they collided, the impact was not forceful. It was soft. It was gentle. Ruth Ann caught Jasmine the way she had caught her in the hospital, cradling her daughter's head against her shoulder, one hand on the back of Jasmine's neck, the other wrapped around her waist, holding her with a tenderness that 25 years of absence had done nothing to diminish. "My baby," Ruth Ann said. Her voice was wrecked. "My baby girl. Oh God, my baby girl, I am so sorry, I am so sorry. I never wanted to let you go. They made me. They made me, and I have been trying to get back to you every day since." Jasmine was sobbing into her mother's shoulder. "I know, Mama, I know. I am not angry. I was never angry. I just wanted to find you." "You found me," Ruth Ann said. "You found me. You are here. Oh God, you are really here. You are so beautiful. You are so beautiful, baby. Look at you." Ruth Ann pulled back and held Jasmine's face in her hands. She studied her daughter's face the way she had studied it 25 years ago in those 4 minutes. The nose, the cheeks, the curve of her mouth, the eyes, those eyes that were exactly like her own. "You have my eyes," Ruth Ann whispered. "I know," Jasmine said, laughing through her tears. "Everyone always said I did not look like my parents. Now I know why." Ruth Ann laughed. It was a broken, beautiful sound, the laugh of a woman experiencing joy for the first time in longer than she could remember. Then Ruth Ann did something that brought the entire studio to its knees. She reached behind her neck and unclasped the gold locket. She opened it and took out the tiny hospital bracelet, the one she had slipped off Jasmine's wrist 25 years ago, the one she had worn around her neck every single day since. She held it up for Jasmine to see. "This was on your wrist," Ruth Ann said. "For 4 minutes this was on your wrist, and you were in my arms. I took it because I needed proof that you were real. That I had not dreamed you." Jasmine took the bracelet. It was so small it barely fit around 2 of her fingers. She stared at it, and her face collapsed in a way that was beyond tears. It was the face of a woman holding the physical evidence of her own origin story. The moment she existed and was loved and was held, even if only for 4 minutes. "You kept this," Jasmine whispered. "For 25 years. "I would have kept it for 100, Ruth Ann said. Then Jasmine took off her butterfly necklace, the one Diane had given her on her first day of teaching. She held it up. "My mom Diane gave me this. She said butterflies start in the dark and then they fly. You were in the dark for a long time, Mama, but you are flying now." She clasped the butterfly necklace around Ruth Ann's neck. Ruth Ann pressed her hand against it and closed her eyes. And on that stage, in front of 200 people and cameras that would carry this moment to millions more, a daughter gave her birth mother a pair of wings. But the moment that truly undid everyone, the moment that Steve Harvey would later call the most powerful thing he had ever witnessed on television, happened next. Diane Carter, Jasmine's adoptive mother, walked across the stage. She walked directly to Ruth Ann, and she did something that no one expected. Diane hugged her. Not a polite, careful, camera-ready hug. A real hug, a mother-to-mother hug, the hug of a woman who had raised another woman's child and had loved that child with everything she had, now meeting the woman who had given her that gift. "Thank you," Diane said to Ruth Ann. "Thank you for giving me my daughter. Thank you for loving her enough to let her go, and thank you for never forgetting her." Ruth Ann broke down completely. She held onto Diane like a lifeboat. "Thank you for giving her butterflies," Ruth Ann whispered. "Thank you for giving her the life I could not." "We are going to do this together now," Diane said. "She does not have to choose. She has two mothers who love her. That is not a problem. That is a blessing." Jasmine stood between them, a hand on each of their arms, and the three women cried together in a triangle of love that rewrote every assumption the audience had about what adoption means, what motherhood means, and what family means. Steve Harvey was sitting on the edge of the stage. He was not even trying to host anymore. He was just a man watching something holy happen in front of him. When a producer asked if he wanted a tissue, he shook his head and said, loud enough for the microphone to catch, "I do not want a tissue. I want to remember exactly what this feels like." When the episode aired, it became the emotional event of the year. The clip of Jasmine turning around was viewed over 90 million times in the first 10 days. But it was the moment between Diane and Ruth Ann, the two mothers embracing, that truly broke the internet. That clip alone was shared over 20 million times. Adoption agencies across the country reported being flooded with calls from people inspired to adopt, to search for biological family, or to seek reconciliation with birth parents they had lost contact with. Ruth Ann and Jasmine spoke on the phone every single day for the first 3 months after the reunion. Then Ruth Ann drove to Charlotte and met Jasmine's kindergarten class. She sat in the tiny chairs and listened to Jasmine read stories with different voices and watched her daughter wipe a child's tears and hold a scared boy's hand. And Ruth Ann cried quietly in the back of the room because she was watching her daughter do exactly what she did at the daycare center. The same tenderness, the same patience, the same instinct, 25 years apart, and they were the same. Jasmine visited Fayetteville the following month. Ruth Ann showed her the daycare center. She showed her the apartment. She showed her the shelf where she kept the candles she lit every year. And she showed her something Jasmine had not expected. Ruth Ann had a box in her closet. Inside the box were 25 birthday cards, one for every year. Each card was handwritten, addressed to a daughter Ruth Ann did not know how to find. Each card said something different, but they all ended the same way. "I love you, I am sorry, and I will find you." Jasmine read every single one. It took her 3 hours because she had to stop and cry between almost every card. When she finished, she looked at Ruth Ann and said, "You never forgot me, not for one day." "Not for 1 second," Ruth Ann said. The relationship between the two families blossomed in a way that surprised everyone, especially Ruth Ann, who had been terrified that Diane and Frank would see her as a threat. They did not. Diane invited Ruth Ann to Thanksgiving that first year. Ruth Ann brought sweet potato pie. It was not as good as Diane's, but nobody said that. They just ate both and laughed about whose recipe was better. By the second year, holidays were a joint affair. Ruth Ann, Thomas, the Carters, Jasmine, Kevin, Rachel, all of them around one table. It was loud and chaotic and beautiful. Ruth Ann's relationship with her own parents was more complicated. Sergeant Mitchell had passed away years earlier, but Evelyn was still alive. After the episode aired, Evelyn called Ruth Ann for the first time in years. The conversation was stiff and painful. Evelyn did not apologize directly, but she said, "I should have done more." Ruth Ann said, "Yes, you should have." And then, after a long silence, Ruth Ann said, "But I am done being angry. It took too much, and I need everything I have for Jasmine." The reconciliation between Ruth Ann and Evelyn was slow and incomplete. Some wounds heal, some just stop bleeding. But Ruth Ann's granddaughter, the child Jasmine and Kevin would eventually have, a baby girl they named Hope, became the bridge that brought even Evelyn back into the fold. Because grandmothers have a way of softening when babies are involved. Even grandmothers who once stood silent in doorways. Steve Harvey kept in close contact with both families. He visited Jasmine's classroom and read a story to her kindergartners using his own set of voices that were, according to the 5-year-olds, even better than Mrs. Carter's. Jasmine disputed this loudly. The video of Steve reading to kindergartners went viral on its own. When someone asked Steve in an interview why this particular reunion affected him so deeply, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I have children. I know what it feels like to hold your baby for the first time. Now imagine someone takes that baby away after 4 minutes, and you spend the next 25 years wondering if she is okay. Ruth Ann never stopped loving a child she held for 4 minutes. That is not regular love. That is something supernatural. And Jasmine, who had every reason to be angry, who could have resented the woman who gave her up, instead said, "Thank you." That kind of grace does not come from nowhere. It comes from being raised right. It comes from Diane and Frank. And it comes from the love Ruth Ann poured into those 4 minutes, love so strong it traveled through 25 years and landed exactly where it was supposed to. 2 years after the episode, Jasmine published an essay that went viral. It was titled, "I Have Two Mothers," and it described what it was like to love both Diane and Ruth Ann, not as competing figures but as complementary ones. She wrote that Diane gave her roots and Ruth Ann gave her answers. She wrote that Diane taught her how to teach and Ruth Ann showed her where her tenderness came from. She wrote that having two mothers was not confusing or complicated. It was abundance. The essay was reprinted in adoption magazines, parenting journals, and educational publications across the country. It was read at adoption conferences and used in training materials for social workers. Jasmine became an advocate for open adoption practices, arguing that children had a right to know their origin stories and that birth parents deserved support rather than shame. Ruth Ann eventually left the daycare center and went to work for an adoption support organization, counseling birth mothers who had been forced to relinquish their children. She was uniquely qualified. She had been that girl on the kitchen floor. She knew what it felt like to beg and be told no. And she knew what it felt like to carry a candle for 25 years and finally have it answered. On the first anniversary of the reunion, the entire extended family gathered at the Carter house in Charlotte. Ruth Ann brought the box of 25 birthday cards. Jasmine brought the hospital bracelet and the gold locket, which she now wore alongside the butterfly necklace. Diane brought photo albums from Jasmine's childhood. And together, the three women sat on the back porch and went through every picture, every card, every memory, stitching together a story that had been split in two for a quarter-century. That evening, as the sun was going down, Jasmine lit a candle. She set it on the porch railing and looked at Ruth Ann. "Your turn to make a wish, Mama. You have been lighting candles for 25 years. What do you wish for now?" Ruth Ann looked at the candle. She looked at Jasmine. She looked at Diane. She looked at the house full of family behind them, the noise and laughter and love spilling through the open windows. "I do not need to wish for anything anymore," Ruth Ann said. "Everything I ever wished for is sitting right in front of me." Jasmine blew out the candle, and for the first time in 25 years, the darkness that followed was not empty. It was full of family, full of answers. Full of a love that had survived everything the world had thrown at it and come out the other side still burning. If this story made you feel something, I need you to act on that feeling right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with every mother, every daughter, and every person who has ever wondered where they came from. Because somewhere out there, someone is lighting a candle for you too. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the one thing you have been waiting your whole life to hear? I read every single comment and I carry your stories with me. Until next time, love fiercely and forgive freely. God bless.